the biggest regular season college football game in the history of Tuscaloosa in that stadium. Number 2, Georgia. Number 4, Alabama. Carson Beck, Jalen Milrow. Let's go.
College game day is going to be there, so you know Nick Saban's going to get a hero's welcome. We've seen these two meet up in the national championship, SEC championship. They've they played once in the regular season a couple years ago. Alabama won that game. I believe that game was also in Tuscaloosa. Yeah, this is the biggest game of the season to this point. I,
To this point, I think there will be one more bigger game. It will be Georgia and Texas in a couple weeks. Um, Now, the biggest thing here for me is this is Kalen DeVore's first big test. Yes, they went to Wisconsin, but Wisconsin is not Georgia. And Georgia may not have the offensive pieces that they had a year ago. I think they really missed Brock Bowers as that big tight end in the middle of the field, and they almost lost to Kentucky. So Georgia's not as deep as they were a couple years ago. I don't think they have the talent defensively or offensively, but this is still Georgia, Alabama. It's not going to be a blowout. It's going to be a very physical game. For me, this game comes down to does Kalen DeVore, who's more of an offensive coach as opposed to Nick Saban, does he have more tricks up his sleeve against Kirby Smart that Georgia does not know about? Can Jalen Milrow scrambling using his legs as more of a playmaker? Can he make more plays than Carson Beck, not only in the passing game, but in the running game? I believe both those answers are yes. And I think, again, the pressure is on for both these teams because both of these teams, Alabama's got a very tough schedule coming up. They got Tennessee, they got Missouri. I believe they got LSU in there, their arch rival, which you can make a case Georgia is now a bigger rival for them than LSU because the loser of this game may not be in the SEC championship game. They're probably going to still make the CFP, but Tennessee looks really good. Texas, obviously, this SEC now with this expansion is probably the deepest it's ever been.
yeah, and Missouri, yeah, they had to fight off Vandy, but they still look decent. Um, and I thought Tennessee Oklahoma would be a better game than it turned out to be. I was very disappointed
The
about
final
that.
score does not indicate Tennessee, in my opinion, dominated that game.
And that's what I'm saying. I was very disappointed. I was so excited about that game. Oklahoma making their SEC debut, prime time, college game day, the whole 9 yards. I was so excited, and it did not live up. But looking at this matchup, it would not surprise me if they have a few designed quarterback runs for Jalen Milrow in this game to try and keep out or Georgia's defense honest. Because we saw how Kentucky, they didn't do a lot of design QB runs, but when the quarterback get out, it did give Georgia problems. If you go back and watch that game. So I could see Alabama looking at that footage and saying, okay, let's try and incorporate some designed QB runs and get Jalen Milrow moving. That way, you bring some of those safeties down into the box to accommodate for that, and then boom, you allow those wide receivers to just work one on one, and you know Alabama's going to hit those deep passes constantly.
As always, when it comes to this game, it's going to come down to who can set the line of scrimmage, who can have big plays in the passing and the running game, and who can limit their turnovers. I think this is a defensive battle. I think it's, 14 to 10, 17, 14, 2017, somewhere around there. I don't think there's going to be a ton of points put up. I think in the end, this game may come down to who has the ball last. And I think, again, at home, Alabama crowd fired up. Georgia offensively hasn't looked as good. Remember, they were struggling against Clemson in the first half. Now, they turned it on in the second half, but that gave you a little bit of concern right there where Alabama, mostly just took out Wisconsin.
So
So
let me ask you this question. We were talking about this a little bit earlier, how the Buccaneers might be inspired by the fact that Brady's going to be back in the building calling that game. I know Nick Saban's not necessarily going to be on the call, but he will be back in town for college game day. Does that give Alabama some extra motivation going into this game?
I'll give you a better one. It wouldn't surprise me if Nick Saban's the last face those players see before they walk out of the tunnel.
Ooh. So, either way, does that give Alabama some extra motivation?
I think it could. It's Georgia. I think there's going to be a lot of emotions early. Kalen DeVore, his first big game in the SEC, but Kalen DeVore has been a big coach and he's won everywhere he's been. And I correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought he had some time at Alabama before going to Washington. I could have swore he was with Nick at some point.
I
Um,
don't think so.
I could be wrong on that, but Kalen DeVore is a winner. Um, and again, I think there's going to be a lot of emotions early. It's going to be who can control the emotion. I think it's going to be, you're going to see a lot of sloppy false starts, bad plays early, settle it down. And the second half, I think we'll pick up. We're going to see a lot more action, but I think it's going to be a very competitive game. I don't see a blowout on either side.
It's interesting. You said this could be a defensive battle. We've said that multiple times, I feel like, about Georgia Alabama games, and then they become scoring fest where it comes right down to the final seconds. So I don't necessarily want to box it in and say, oh, yeah, this is going to be a defensive slugfest when it could turn into like a 38-31 type game. Because
I just don't think Georgia has the explosive playmakers they had in years past.
and I do hear you on that, but given the history of this matchup, I just I have a hard time with seeing it be like a 20-14 or a 24-21 type game. I
No,
just
that's fair. I'll say this for Bama, the strategy is going to be punch Georgia in the mouth and get up early. If Bama needs to put the pressure on Georgia to force Carson back to drop back, because he can move around a little bit, but he's not necessarily a mobile quarterback. He is to stand in the pocket, throw it down the field, which will be very bad, in my opinion, against what's still a very good and talented Alabama defense.
and if Alabama scores a touchdown on their first drive, oh boy, look out.